There comes a moment in life when the struggle to control every detail begins to feel like a burden too heavy to carry. Maybe you've felt it before. Those endless nights of planning, worrying, rehearsing scenarios in your mind, trying to bend life into a shape that feels safe. And then, suddenly, there is a pause. A pause, so still it almost frightens you. But in that stillness, something else makes itself known, a current. Invisible yet undeniable, carrying you, even when you stop trying to swim so hard against the tide. Some call it divine intelligence. Others call it the universe, or the quantum field. But at its heart, it is simply life. Life, arranging itself in ways far wiser than our human plans could ever conceive. It is not distant, not unreachable, not something reserved for mystics or saints. It is here, right now, flowing quietly underneath the noise of your mind, waiting for you to notice it. And here is the secret most of us miss. This intelligence does not demand effort. It asks for trust. Not the trust of wishful thinking or blind hope, but a trust that settles deep into your body, into the very cells that make you. A trust that feels like your shoulders dropping after years of carrying a weight. A trust that feels like an exhale you didn't know you were holding. When you allow yourself to rest in that trust, something remarkable begins to happen. Reality, the same reality that once felt rigid and unyielding, starts to soften. It bends. It responds. It blossoms in ways that seem almost miraculous. But I promise you, it is not a miracle. It is the natural order of quantum energy, when doubt and control no longer stand in its way. Think about a river for a moment. A river does not force itself to flow. It doesn't push against its own banks or argue with the rocks in its path. It moves with grace, finding the easiest way forward, carving valleys, and nourishing life along the way. That same flow is available to you, always. Yet so often, we stand in the water thrashing, trying to make it go faster, or slower, or in a direction we prefer. And in our struggle, we exhaust ourselves. But the moment we let go and trust the current, the river carries us exactly where we need to be. I know this may sound simple, but simplicity is often the hardest thing to accept. We've been taught from the beginning that life rewards effort, that control equals safety, that if we let go, everything will fall apart. But have you noticed? The tighter you grip, the more things slip through your fingers. The harder you try to control, the more fragile life feels. And yet, in those rare moments when you stop clenching so hard, when you breathe, when you allow, you suddenly find that what you need has been right there all along. This is the quiet invitation of the quantum field. It does not scream for your attention. It whispers. It shows up in the coincidence too perfect to be random. In the stranger who speaks the exact words you needed to hear. In the object that appears in your path just when you were searching. These are not accidents. These are the responses of a living, intelligent energy, bending reality around your willingness to trust. I've walked through the darkness of doubt myself. I know what it feels like to keep asking, what if it doesn't work? What if I'm fooling myself? Those questions used to keep me awake at night, spinning endlessly. But here is what I learned. Doubt is not a cautious friend. It is interference. It is static in the signal, noise on the line, keeping you from hearing the symphony that is already being played for you. When you step beyond doubt, not by fighting it, but by setting it down like an old, tired coat, you create the conditions for this intelligence to work through you. Suddenly, your life reorganizes itself, not because you forced it, but because you allowed it. What once seemed impossible unfolds with an elegance you could never have scripted. And in those moments, you realize that what you once called miracle is simply the natural rhythm of the universe when you are not in its way. Maybe you've experienced glimpses of this already. Times when you stopped pushing, and the solution appeared on its own. Times when you stopped worrying and help arrived from nowhere. Times when you relaxed just long enough for the synchronicities to line up so precisely, it felt as though an unseen hand was guiding everything. Those glimpses are not accidents. They are invitations. They are reminders that life does not need to be wrestled into submission. It only needs to be trusted. And let me say this clearly, trusting does not mean becoming passive. It is not sitting back, doing nothing, and waiting for magic. Trust is alive. It is dynamic. It moves through you like breath. It inspires you to take action, but not from fear or control. Rather, from alignment. Trust is what allows your steps to be guided, your words to flow, your choices to resonate. It is what transforms effort into ease and struggle into flow. I want you to imagine, right now, how it would feel if for just one day you release the grip. If for just one day you let the quantum field orchestrate things on your behalf. Imagine beginning your morning with a simple whisper, "Life, I trust you," and then living your day with that same openness, noticing what appears, watching how reality responds. Do you feel how your body softens at the very thought? That softening is the signal. That relaxation is the doorway. This is the path I invite you to walk. Not someday, but now. Not in theory, but in practice. Because the truth is, the flow has always been there. The only question is whether you will allow it. 1. Challenges. As the soil, where trust grows. There is a certain kind of wisdom that only reveals itself in the dark. We resist it. We fight against it. We call it failure, punishment, or even abandonment. But later, when we look back, we realize that the very weight we thought would crush us was, in truth, the weight that pressed us into becoming something more. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, every night of loneliness has a way of carving space inside us. At the time, it feels cruel. It feels unnecessary, as though life is conspiring against us. But just as the seed must be buried in the cold, unseen soil before it can sprout, so too are we placed into those seasons of darkness to awaken a deeper capacity for trust. Think about the seed. On the surface, it looks small, fragile, even lifeless. When it is buried underground, surrounded by dirt and pressure, it cannot see the sunlight. It cannot understand why it has been pushed beneath the surface. If the seed had a mind like ours, it might panic. It might think, "This is the end. I am trapped. I have been forgotten." But the soil is not its prison. It is its preparation. The soil provides the darkness, the pressure, and the nutrients needed for the seed to break open, to release what is hidden inside. Without that burial, the seed would never know its own potential. And isn't that the way of our own lives? The relationships that end, the jobs that fall apart, the doors that close. All of these moments feel, at first, like the soil pressing down on us. We cry out, "Why me? Why now? Why this?" And in the silence that follows, there is rarely an immediate answer. But much later, when the roots have formed and the sprout reaches the light, we see clearly without the darkness. We could not have grown. The truth is, trust cannot be taught in a classroom or learned from a book. It can only be discovered when there is no other option, when the usual structures fall away, when the safety nets are gone, when we are brought to our knees by the weight of life. Only then do we discover what it means to trust something greater than ourselves. Trust is not born in comfort. Trust is born in the places where comfort no longer exists. I remember a season in my own life when everything seemed to collapse at once. The people I thought would stay, left. The stability I clung to, crumbled. Nights were long, days were heavy, and I carried a silence inside me that no one else could touch. At the time, I thought I was being punished. I thought life was cruel. But slowly, as the months unfolded, I began to sense something else at work. My resistance softened. My hands, once clenched, began to open. And it was there, in the quiet emptiness, that I realized I had not been abandoned. I had been planted. This is the paradox. The very soil that feels like suffocation is the environment that makes growth possible. The very pressure that seems unbearable is what cracks us open to a larger self. Without the breaking, there is no blooming. Without the darkness, there is no dawn. When we begin to see challenges this way, they lose their power to define us as victims. We stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this preparing me for?" That shift changes everything. Instead of resenting the soil, we begin to recognize it as sacred ground. Instead of resisting the pressure, we begin to let it do its work, reshaping us, strengthening us, preparing us for the light. It does not mean the pain disappears. Pain is real, and it leaves marks, but even the marks have meaning. A tree carries the memory of every storm in its rings. And yet, those very storms are what make its trunk strong enough to stand tall. The same is true for you. The storms you have weathered are not evidence of weakness. They are the proof of your resilience. They are the soil out of which your trust grows. Perhaps you've noticed that when life is easy, when everything goes according to plan, trust rarely deepens. In comfort, we tend to rely on ourselves, on our routines, on what we already know. But when life takes away the familiar, when the ground shakes beneath us, we are forced to look beyond what we can see, to lean on something unseen. That is when trust begins to take root. So the next time you find yourself in a season of darkness, remember the seed. Remember that being buried is not the same as being lost. Being pressed down is not the same as being destroyed. In fact, it may be the exact condition needed for your hidden potential to break open. The soil is not your enemy. The soil is your ally. The soil is life saying, "There is more inside you than you realize." And it is time for that more to emerge. And so, when you feel the weight of life pressing down, dare to whisper to yourself, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." That whisper is the sound of trust. That whisper is the seed cracking open, ready to grow. 2. Time becomes flexible. There are moments in life when the clock seems almost irrelevant. You know them well. The days that feel like they vanish in a breath, and the nights that stretch on endlessly, as though time itself has forgotten how to move. We've all said it. Where did the time go? Or, in the darker seasons, why won't this day just end? Most of us accept these fluctuations as quirks of perception. But when you begin to trust the deeper intelligence of life, what I call the quantum field, you start to see that time is not a rigid master, ticking away in the background. Time is more like a fabric, and consciousness is the hand that stretches and folds it. When you are immersed in fear, in doubt, in endless mental struggle, minutes feel like hours. The weight of your thoughts slows everything down, as though you are dragging reality with you. But when you surrender, when you step into trust, suddenly, time begins to bend. Hours dissolve into what feels like minutes, or a single breath can hold an eternity of presence. It's as if life is showing you that time is not fixed. It is responsive, alive, and intimately connected to your state of being. Think back to a moment when you were fully alive, maybe holding a grandchild for the first time, or watching a sunset paint the sky, or sitting in deep conversation with someone you love. In those moments, the clock did not matter. You weren't counting minutes. You were immersed in the fullness of now. And because you were immersed, time expanded. A short encounter became timeless, carrying a richness far greater than its measure on the clock. This is what happens when trust takes root. When you let go of control, you slip into the current of the present moment. And in the present moment, time is fluid. It stretches, contracts, and rearranges itself according to the quality of your awareness. I've seen this in my own life in ways that still leave me humbled. During seasons of anxiety, even the simplest tasks felt endless. Waiting for a phone call, waiting for news, waiting for something to change. Every minute dragged like an eternity. But in seasons of trust, the opposite unfolded. I would look up and realize hours had passed in what felt like a single, flowing moment. Work that once felt heavy became light. Even waiting transformed. No longer a burden, but a kind of spacious rest. And here is the deeper truth. Time is not the fixed ruler we think it is. It is elastic, shaped by consciousness. Scientists call this subjective time, but anyone who has ever fallen in love, or grieved, or sat in meditation already knows it. Time bends with our state of being. When we resist life, time resists us. When we flow with life, time flows too. I often think of time as music. Imagine a symphony being played. The notes are written on the page, but the way the music is experienced depends on the conductor and the musicians. Some passages are played slowly, stretching the emotion across long, tender notes. Others rush forward with urgency, carrying you quickly into the next movement. The sheet music is the same, but the experience shifts depending on how it is lived. Consciousness is the conductor. Your awareness is what sets the tempo. And here is something even more profound. When you trust the intelligence of life, you realize you can step out of the constant ticking altogether. You can enter a space where the past no longer burdens you, and the future no longer haunts you. In that space, there is only the eternal present, and the eternal present is always abundant, always enough. Think about the times when you've worried about the future. Hours dissolve into fear about things that may never happen. Or the times when you replayed the past, dragging old regrets into the present moment. In both cases, you are not living in real time. You are living in remembered or imagined time, and it drains you. But when you rest in trust, you no longer need to run ahead or fall behind. You step into what I can only describe as the spacious now. In this space, a minute can feel like a sanctuary. A morning walk can feel like an entire day's worth of nourishment. A simple meal shared with someone you love can feel like it lasts forever. Because in your heart, it does. That is the gift of flexible time. It is not measured by the hands of the clock, but by the depth of your presence. There's a quiet miracle in this. Because once you realize time bends, you stop rushing, you stop forcing, you stop believing that everything must happen by a certain deadline in order to be on track. You begin to understand that life has its own timing, wiser than your own, and that timing is not measured in hours or years. It is measured in alignment. Have you noticed how often the right things happen at what feels like the wrong time? A conversation that shows up years later than you wanted, but exactly when you needed it. A delay that frustrates you in the moment, but later reveals itself as perfect protection. When you live with trust, you start to see that timing has never been against you. It has always been for you, even when it didn't match your plans. So, if you find yourself saying, "I'm running out of time," I invite you to pause, breathe, feel the ground beneath you. Ask yourself, is it really time I am running out of, or is it trust? More often than not, it is not time that is scarce. It is trust that is missing. Because when you step into trust, time becomes a partner, not a prison. And perhaps that is the simplest truth of all. Time is not something we must master. It is something we must learn to dance with. Sometimes the music is slow, inviting us to linger. Sometimes it is fast, urging us to move. But when we surrender to the rhythm, when we let trust be our guide, every step is in perfect timing. So the next time you feel hurried, pressured, or left behind, remember, you are not at war with time. You are swimming in an ocean that bends with you, Trust, and watch how even the hours reshape themselves around the quiet certainty of your heart. 3. A new intelligence awakens within. There comes a point on this path where thinking itself begins to change. You know the usual stream of thoughts, the constant chatter, the replay of old memories, the endless what-ifs about tomorrow. That old voice in the head feels like a worn-out radio, playing the same stations on repeat. You've heard the songs 1,000 times, and yet it plays on, filling the silence with static. But when you begin to live with trust, when you stop gripping every moment so tightly, you notice something astonishing. The noise quiets, the old soundtrack loses its hold, and in its place, something new begins to rise. It does not feel like you are creating these thoughts. It feels more like you are remembering them, like they were always waiting, hidden beneath the surface of your awareness. I often describe it as a download, but not in the way a computer downloads a file. It is softer, gentler, more organic. It feels like truth arriving fully formed, like clarity dawning all at once. One moment you are wrestling with confusion, and the next, understanding blooms inside you without effort. It is as though a door has been opened within, and what was locked away is suddenly yours to see. This is not the kind of knowledge you can memorize or study. It is not secondhand wisdom gathered from books or lectures. It is living insight, arising directly from the deeper layers of your consciousness. Imagine finding an old letter tucked into a drawer, written in your own handwriting, though you don't remember writing it. That's how it feels. The message comes from you, but from a part of you that is vaster and wiser than the self you usually identify with. I remember a time in my life when I was struggling, lost in questions I couldn't answer. I kept searching outside myself, asking friends, reading, even praying for signs. And then one morning, in the quiet just before dawn, the answer simply appeared, not as a voice I could hear with my ears, but as a knowing that filled my body like warm light. I didn't have to think about it, analyze it, or argue with it. It just arrived, complete and whole. And the moment I received it, I realized this wisdom had always been there, waiting for me to grow still enough to notice. When you trust the quantum intelligence of life, this kind of awakening becomes more common. You no longer chase answers frantically. You let them come. And they do come. Sometimes in dreams. Sometimes in sudden clarity. Sometimes in words that flow from your own mouth that surprise even you. Have you ever said something to someone and realized, as the words left your lips, that they were meant as much for you as for them? That is the new intelligence speaking through you. It feels different from ordinary thought. Ordinary thought is restless, repetitive, and often heavy. This new intelligence is spacious, calm, and liberating. It carries the weight of truth, not the burden of worry. You don't have to convince yourself of it. It convinces you by the peace it brings. And perhaps the most healing part of this awakening is the recognition that you are not cut off from wisdom. You are not empty. You are not broken. The intelligence of life has always been woven into your being. Trust does not bring something foreign into you. It clears the debris so you can access what was always yours. Think of it like water flowing through a pipe. For years, the pipe may have been clogged with rust and debris. Slowing the stream to a trickle, you thought the water had dried up, but the source never stopped. It was always flowing, waiting. When you release doubt, when you soften into trust, it is like clearing the pipe. The water rushes through, pure and abundant. The wisdom that emerges from within you is that water, refreshing, nourishing, undeniable. And this awakening changes the way you see yourself. You stop believing that you are only the sum of your past experiences, your education, or the roles you play in life. You begin to realize that you are connected to something far larger. The mind you thought was small and limited reveals itself as a doorway to infinite intelligence. You are no longer just a thinker. You are an instrument through which wisdom can express itself. Some people call this intuition. Others call it guidance. Others still call it the voice of the soul. The label doesn't matter. What matters is that it feels like home. It feels like the deepest part of you finally speaking clearly, after years of being drowned out. And once you've touched it, you can never truly forget it. Even if you lose sight of it for a time, the memory of its clarity will draw you back. This is why trust is so essential. Without trust, the mind keeps interfering, questioning, doubting, trying to control, and that interference creates static. But when you allow yourself to lean back into trust, you become receptive. You tune the dial, and the signal comes in strong and clear. So, when the old thoughts circle again, when the static grows loud, pause, breathe, remind yourself, I don't need to force the answer. It is already within me. And then listen, not with strain, but with openness. Notice the subtle shifts, the gentle nudges, the quiet clarity. This is the new intelligence awakening. And here is the beautiful paradox: the more you trust it, the more it appears. The more you listen, the louder it becomes. Until one day you realize that what once felt like an occasional gift is actually your natural state. You were never meant to live cut off from wisdom. You were always meant to remember that wisdom is who you are. So let yourself trust. Let the old thoughts fall away like leaves in autumn. Beneath them, the tree of your being is still strong, still rooted, still full of life. And in its branches, new knowledge is waiting to blossom. Not knowledge you must chase, but knowledge that rises naturally from the soil of your soul. That is the gift of trust. It doesn't give you something new. It allows you to remember the intelligence that has always been yours. 4. Energy attracts all living beings. Have you ever noticed how animals and children seem to know something we adults forget? They don't need explanations. They don't need to analyze your resume, your words, or your plans. They feel you. They sense something deeper than appearances. And because they live closer to the natural rhythms of life, they respond to energy in ways that are often startling in their simplicity. When you begin to live in trust, when your inner chaos settles and your heart softens into peace, your energy changes. You may not notice it right away, but others do. Animals, especially, are masters at reading the unseen. A dog will come sit by your feet without needing an invitation. A cat will curl against your chest, even if it usually avoids people. Birds may linger near you longer than expected. And children, those wide-eyed, sensitive souls, will look at you with curiosity, drawn not to what you say, but to what you radiate. I've lived long enough to know this is not coincidence. For years, I carried an anxious field around me. I was polite on the outside, but inside, my energy was tight, restless, like static electricity, buzzing everywhere. And I noticed that animals often kept their distance. Children too, sometimes shy, sometimes unsettled. At the time, I thought little of it, but as I learned to trust more deeply, to release my grip on control and rest in the current of life, something shifted. My body softened, my thoughts slowed, and then something remarkable happened. Life began to come closer. I remember one afternoon, sitting quietly under a tree, simply breathing and allowing myself to feel the earth beneath me. A stray dog I had seen around the neighborhood approached. Normally, it kept its distance, cautious and mistrusting. But that day, it walked right up, tail low, eyes gentle, and laid its head on my knee. There was no food in my hand, no coaxing, only presence, only peace. In that moment, I realized that animals were responding not to my words or gestures, but to the field of calm that trust had created around me. Children sense this. 2. A child does not need to be told who feels safe and who does not. They know. Their nervous systems are attuned to coherence. They gravitate toward those whose presence is steady, gentle, and genuine. I've had children I barely knew run to me, climbing onto my lap as though they had known me for years. Not because of who I am on the surface, but because of what they could feel beneath the surface. A kind of safety that comes from alignment with something greater than myself. This is what it means to become a broadcast tower of peace. Not because you are trying to send out signals, not because you are forcing positivity, but because your trust in life creates a coherent field around you. Just like tuning a radio to a clear station, your energy becomes free of static, and others, whether they are human, animal, or even the subtle rhythms of nature, can feel that clarity. It is not mystical. It is profoundly natural. Every living being is sensitive to fields of energy. Science now tells us what indigenous cultures always knew: our hearts, our brains, even our cells emit electromagnetic fields. And these fields shift depending on our state of consciousness. Fear creates one signal. Trust creates another. Chaos broadcasts one frequency. Peace broadcasts another. You don't have to advertise it. It radiates out of you, the way sunlight radiates from the sun. And here is what is most humbling. You don't even need to speak for this energy to have an impact. I have sat in silence with people who later told me they felt lighter, calmer, more hopeful, simply from being in the same space. I did nothing but breathe and allow trust to hold me. That alone was enough. It reminded me that our presence is often more powerful than our words. Think of someone you've known whose very presence made you feel safe. Maybe a grandparent, maybe a mentor, maybe even a stranger who smiled at you on a hard day. You might not remember what they said, but you remember how they made you feel. That is the power of energy. That is the invisible transmission that flows when someone lives in coherence with trust. So, what does this mean for you? It means that the work of trusting life is never just for yourself. The calm you cultivate ripples outward. The peace you embody becomes nourishment for others. A nervous dog, a restless child, even a stranger passing by. They all feel it. They may not be able to explain it, but they recognize it, and they respond to it. And this brings us to a quiet, liberating truth. You don't need to convince anyone of who you are. You don't need to prove your worth, defend your choices, or argue for your beliefs. Who you are speaks louder than any explanation. Your energy tells the story. Your presence delivers the message. As you continue to trust more deeply, you may notice people saying, "I feel better when you're around," or "You have a calming effect." You may notice animals drawn to you, children curious about you, even strangers opening up in unexpected ways. This is not about being special. It is about being aligned. It is about allowing the quantum field of life to harmonize your being so that you become a resting place for others. And perhaps the greatest gift of all is this: when others feel safe with you, they are reminded of their own capacity for peace. Your coherence gives them permission to find coherence in themselves. Your trust invites their trust. Your presence awakens their presence. In this way, your energy becomes not just a comfort, but a catalyst for healing in the lives of others. So, the next time an animal lingers at your feet, or a child gazes at you with unexplainable warmth, pause and smile. Recognize that they are not responding to what you say, but to what you are. They are reading the harmony in your field, the peace in your presence. And in that recognition, remember, this is what happens when you live in trust. You become a quiet beacon in a noisy world, a place where life feels safe to draw near. 5. The difference between partial trust and complete trust. There's an old saying: you cannot step into a river with one foot on the shore. And yet, most of us try. We dip a toe into trust, but we keep the other foot firmly planted in control. We whisper, Yes, I believe, but in the back of our minds, we still make backup plans, still monitor outcomes, still hold on to the wheel just in case. That is partial trust, and while it is a beginning, it is not the same as surrender. Partial trust still comes from fear. It still says, I'll give you this much, but no more. I'll trust as long as it looks the way I want it to look. Complete trust is different. Complete trust is the moment you take your hands off the wheel and let the car of your life be guided by a greater intelligence. It doesn't mean recklessness. It doesn't mean passivity. It means you finally recognize that your mind, no matter how clever, cannot see the entire road. It cannot anticipate every turn, every storm, every detour. Only life itself can. And when you surrender completely, life begins to take you to places your reasoning could never have mapped. I know this difference firsthand. For years, I thought I trusted. I prayed. I said the right words. But underneath, I was still clenching, still gripping tightly. I told life, I trust you, while secretly checking over my shoulder, calculating how to rescue myself if things didn't go as planned. That wasn't trust. That was negotiation. And negotiation always left me exhausted, because I was still trying to manage both my will and life's will at the same time. Then came the moment I had nothing left to manage with. The plans fell apart. The safety nets dissolved. And there was nothing I could do. It was terrifying and liberating. For the first time, I had no choice but to trust completely. And in that surrender, something shifted. The anxiety that had haunted me disappeared like mist in the sun. I realized that what I had called trust before was only half measures. The peace came only when I let go entirely. Partial trust is like trying to sail with the anchor still down. You may feel the wind against the sail. You may even move a little. But the anchor of control drags beneath you. You'll never go far until you pull it up. Complete trust is when you lift the anchor. You let the wind carry you. You stop telling the ocean where it should take you and allow the current to reveal destinations you couldn't have imagined. But let me be clear. Complete trust does not mean abandoning responsibility. It does not mean lying down and doing nothing. It means acting from alignment instead of anxiety. It means listening to the quiet guidance within, instead of the frantic chatter of fear. It means allowing life to set the direction while you provide the willingness to move. You still steer, but you steer in harmony with the current, not against it. This is the difference between partial and complete trust. Partial trust still says, I must control the outcome. Complete the trust says, I will show up fully, but I don't need to control how this unfolds. Partial trust tries to predict. Complete trust allows surprise. Partial trust is rooted in scarcity, always fearing loss. Complete trust is rooted in abundance, always open to more than you imagined. Think about it like this. Have you ever driven with someone who didn't quite trust the GPS? They keep second-guessing the directions, arguing with the voice, trying alternate routes. The trip becomes stressful, full of tension. That is partial trust. Now imagine allowing the GPS, one that sees every turn, every block, every accident up ahead, to guide you. You relax. You enjoy the scenery. And even if there is a detour, you know the system is recalculating for your best path. That is complete trust. Life is like that GPS. It has the vantage point we do not. It sees the turns we cannot. And when we surrender completely, we allow that intelligence to guide us. It does not mean the journey is always smooth. It means the journey is always purposeful. I've spoken with many people in their later years who look back and say, the things I fought hardest against turned out to be blessings in disguise. They thought they had failed, but later realized they had been redirected. That is what life does when you surrender. It recalculates. It reroutes. It uses even the detours as part of the journey. But you cannot see this if you only half trust. Complete trust also changes the way time feels. With partial trust, you are always waiting, always checking, always restless, like a passenger who won't stop asking, "Are we there yet?" But with complete trust, you settle into the ride. You don't need to know every detail. You know you'll arrive. And the ride itself becomes a part of the destination. And here's the quiet truth: complete trust isn't something you achieve. It is something you allow. It doesn't come from effort. It comes from surrender. It happens the moment you unclench your fist and realize you were never holding the world together anyway. Life was always holding you. So, ask yourself, are your hands still on the wheel? Are you still keeping the anchor down, just in case? If so, be gentle with yourself. Partial trust is still a beginning, but know this peace will not fully arrive until you let go, until you lift the anchor, until you release the wheel, because when you do, something remarkable happens. Life reveals paths you never considered. People show up who feel heaven sent. Doors open that logic could never have planned. And you realize that surrender is not the end of control. It is the beginning of freedom. Complete trust is not reckless. It is wise. It is not weakness. It is strength beyond measure. And once you taste it, you'll know the difference forever. 6. Your body begins to change. There is a quiet moment, almost unnoticed at first, when you realize that your body no longer carries the same weight it once did. The knots in your shoulders that felt permanent, the heaviness in your chest, the tension you've lived with for years. One day, they begin to loosen, not because you forced them away, not because you followed some strict regimen, but because something within you finally let go. When you step into trust, the body responds. It always does. For years, maybe decades, your body has been wired for survival. Constantly alert, bracing for what might go wrong, carrying the silent load of your worries. The body doesn't know the difference between an actual threat and a thought of a threat. To your nervous system, they are the same. And so, every anxious thought, every attempt to control, every fear of the unknown has been stored in muscle, in breath, in bone. I remember the years when my body lived in tension. Even while I smiled on the outside, my shoulders were always raised. My breath shallow. I thought it was normal. I thought that was just what it meant to be alive in this world. To live clenched. To always be on guard. But the truth is, that is not living, that is surviving. And survival has its place. We need it in moments of danger. But many of us never leave survival mode. We spend years stuck there, rehearsing dangers that never arrive, reliving the pains of the past, preparing endlessly for tomorrow. The body bears the cost of that way of living. It wears down, it stiffens, it forgets how to rest. But when trust begins to take root, a shift happens. You no longer ask your body to carry the weight of constant vigilance. You no longer flood it with signals of fear. Instead, you begin to feed it with calm, with safety, with surrender. And in that atmosphere, the body remembers how to heal. It is not about techniques or force. Healing arrives naturally. The way a wound closes when you stop picking at it. Trust is that stopping. It is the space that allows the body's own intelligence to awaken. Slowly, gently, you find yourself breathing more deeply. Your sleep grows richer. Even if shorter, it nourishes you more than long restless nights ever did. Energy returns. Not the kind that burns quickly and leaves you drained, but the steady, flowing energy of life itself. I have seen people who lived with chronic tension find release after years of struggle, not through endless treatments, but through surrender. I've spoken to those who carried exhaustion for decades, only to find that when they stopped fighting life, their bodies seemed to reset. It is as if trust reprograms us from the inside out. From survival to creativity, from holding on to opening up. And it makes sense, doesn't it? The body was never designed to live in constant fear. It was designed to adapt, to flow, to create. When fear dominates us, the body contracts, muscles tighten, digestion slows, breath shortens, immune function weakens. But when trust leads, the body expands, muscles s'offrent, energy circulates, the immune system strengthens, life can move through you again. Think about how a child sleeps. They don't analyze whether the bed will hold them. They don't worry about whether morning will come. They simply surrender. And in that surrender, the body rests so deeply it grows. That same rest is available to us, even as adults. Even after years of carrying burdens, trust gives the body permission to return to that childlike state, not of ignorance, but of innocence. An innocence that says, I am held, I am safe. I know some people hear this and feel skeptical. They think, how can something as intangible as trust change my physical body? But if you've ever felt your heart race from a sudden thought, or your stomach drop from a moment of fear, you already know. The body responds instantly to the mind. And if fear can harm us so quickly, imagine what sustained trust can do. There is no force here, no effort. Trust is not a workout. It is a release. It is the difference between clenching your fist and finally letting it open, between grinding your teeth and allowing your jaw to rest, between dragging yourself through the day and discovering that the day carries you. And the deeper gift is this: as the body heals, life opens. When your energy is no longer spent holding tension, it can be used to create. When your nights restore you instead of depleting you, mornings become invitations rather than burdens. When your body is no longer just surviving, it begins to express. You laugh more easily. You move with more grace. You carry an aliveness that others can see. I remember once sitting with an older friend who had lived a hard life. She told me, I used to think my body was my enemy. It hurt. It slowed down. It betrayed me. But when I finally stopped fighting everything, when I learned to soften, I realized my body wasn't against me. It was just waiting for me to stop making it carry all my fear. Those words stayed with me, because I believe that is true for all of us. So if your body feels heavy, if your energy feels drained, if you lie awake at night unable to rest, consider this. Maybe it is not more effort you need. Maybe it is more trust. Maybe your body is not broken. It is simply tired of being on guard. And here is the miracle. The moment you give it permission, it will begin to heal. You may not notice overnight, but slowly, steadily, the tension releases, the energy flows, the sleep restores, and you realize you are no longer surviving, you are living. So let your body change. Let trust be the medicine. Let peace be the reset. Your body knows how to return to harmony. All it needs is for you to let go of the fear that's been weighing it down. 7. The meaningful coincidences. There comes a time, once trust has taken root, when the ordinary rhythm of life begins to feel anything but ordinary. You start to notice small details aligning with uncanny precision. A phone call arrives just as you were thinking of someone. A stranger's words echo the very question you whispered to yourself in silence the night before. An object you needed shows up in the most unlikely place, exactly when you were about to give up searching. At first, you may laugh and dismiss these things as chance. That's what I used to do. What a funny coincidence, I would say, shaking my head. But after a while, when it happens again and again, you begin to feel something deeper at work. It no longer feels random. It feels intentional, as though life itself has begun to speak to you. Not in thunder or lightning, but in the quiet language of alignment. This is the language of synchronicity, and it has a way of arriving when you are ready to notice. It is not that these patterns never existed before. It is that you were too busy, too restless, too doubtful to see them. Trust opens your eyes, and once you see, you cannot unsee. I remember once, during a season of deep uncertainty, I kept asking silently, am I on the right path? Is this really where I'm meant to go? I didn't speak it out loud. I didn't even share it in a journal. It was just a quiet question lodged in my heart. The very next day, as I walked through a cafe, I passed a table where two strangers were talking. One leaned over to the other and said, clear as day, sometimes the right path is the one you don't plan. Those words stopped me in my tracks. They were not meant for me, but they answered me all the same. I walked out smiling, no longer burdened by the question. That is how synchronicity works. It slips into your world through ordinary means, but carries extraordinary timing. It doesn't shout, it nudges. It doesn't demand, it affirms. And if you have the courage to listen, you begin to realize the universe is not silent. It has always been whispering, waiting for your trust to make you receptive. Some people call it coincidence, others call it luck. But the deeper you go, the more you realize coincidence is simply the word we use when we don't yet have language for connection. Every event is part of a vast web, and trust allows you to glimpse the threads that weave it together. Think of it like music. If you listen casually, you hear notes, one after another, with no special meaning. But if you lean in, if you really listen, you hear the harmony underneath, the pauses, the echoes, the repetition of themes. Life is like that. On the surface, it looks random, but when you are attuned, you hear the symphony, and the symphony always plays in time with your heart. The beauty of synchronicity is not just in its mystery, but in its reassurance. It tells you that you are not alone, not wandering aimlessly. It reminds you that your questions are heard, your needs are known, and your path is being guided. Even when you doubt, life has a way of confirming, yes, I see you. Yes, I am here. I've heard countless stories of people experiencing this. A woman thinking of her late husband hears his favorite song, playing the moment she steps into a store. A man unsure of whether to take a leap of faith sees a billboard with the very words he needed. A child asks a silent question and finds the answer in the smile of a stranger. These are not small things. They are signs. They are reminders that the field of life is responsive, alive, intimate. And here is what I've learned. The more you trust, the more these synchronicities multiply. Not because life suddenly changes, but because your awareness does. Trust clears the fog. It makes you open enough to notice the threads that were always weaving through your days. What once seemed random now feels deeply personal. What once felt silent now feels conversational. The skeptic in us will try to argue. It will say, you're just seeing patterns where there are none. And yes, the mind can do that. But ask yourself, why do these patterns bring peace? Why do they arrive at moments of deepest need? Why do they feel like nourishment instead of noise? That is the difference. Synchronicities don't confuse you. They comfort you. They don't burden you with more questions. They quietly answer the ones you already carry. And once you recognize this, you begin to walk through life differently. You pay attention to the chance encounters, the words overheard, the timing of events. You no longer shrug them off. You see them for what they are. Life's way of letting you know you are in dialogue with something greater than yourself. To live this way is to realize that you are not a solitary traveler. You are in conversation with the universe. Every sign, every alignment, every coincidence is part of that conversation. And the more you respond with trust, the more fluent you become in its language. So, when the call comes at the perfect time, when the answer arrives in a stranger's voice, when the object you need appears right before your eyes, pause it, smile, recognize that you are being spoken to. Life is reminding you, you are seen, you are guided, You are exactly where you need to be. And that recognition is no small thing. It is the difference between feeling abandoned in a random world and realizing you are deeply, intricately, tenderly connected. Synchronicities are not accidents. They are reminders that trust has tuned you to the frequency of a universe that has always been for you, never against you. 8. The story of surrender. There's a story I've carried with me for years. Not because it is dramatic or grand, but because it is simple, and in its simplicity, it holds a kind of sacred truth. It's the story of someone who grew tired of holding everything together. They had spent years trying to manage every detail, planning every outcome, calculating every risk. Their mind was a constant ledger of what could go wrong and how to prevent it. And then one day, after carrying the weight for too long, something inside them broke open. It wasn't defeat. It was release. They stopped strategizing, stopped negotiating with life, stopped trying to micromanage reality. Instead, they whispered one sentence, barely audible, but powerful enough to change everything. I trust quantum energy. I trust life itself. That whisper, spoken not with desperation, but with sincerity, became the doorway. What happened next was not a sudden miracle in the way we imagine miracles, flashing lights, instant answers. No, it was something quieter, gentler, and far more profound. Life began to rearrange itself around that surrender. Opportunities appeared where there had once been only closed doors. Work flowed more easily, as though effort was being met halfway by invisible hands. Financial support surfaced in unexpected ways, not as a lottery ticket, but as steady, reliable channels that seemed perfectly timed. Health improved, not because of drastic intervention, but because stress lifted, and with it, the body found space to heal. Relationships shifted. Some fell away, others deepened, and new ones arrived carrying the unmistakable signature of alignment. This is the story of surrender, and perhaps you've lived pieces of it yourself. The moment you stopped chasing, something you longed for arrived. The moment you stopped obsessing, clarity came. The moment you stopped forcing, the pieces fell into place on their own. I can tell you from experience, surrender does not mean giving up. It does not mean throwing your hands in the air and refusing to live. It means choosing to live differently. It means stepping out of the exhausting role of puppet master, pulling invisible strings, and stepping into the role of partner, allowing life to co-create with you. The person in this story didn't stop living. They still woke up each morning. They still worked, loved, showed up, and made choices. But the inner posture changed. Instead of pushing, they listened. Instead of demanding, they allowed. Instead of controlling, they trusted. And that change in posture shifted everything. Think about a dancer learning to waltz. At first, the steps are rigid, the movements stiff. You're counting beats in your head, watching your feet, trying not to stumble. But then, if you let go just enough, if you trust your partner and the music, something beautiful happens. The dance carries you. You are no longer thinking. Your body is flowing, guided by a rhythm larger than yourself. That is surrender. Life is the music, and trust is your willingness to let yourself be moved. I remember a season of my own life when surrender was the only option left. I had tried everything, pushed every lever, knocked on every door, and still, nothing moved. The harder I tried, the more stuck I felt. And then, almost in exhaustion, I whispered something like what that person did. All right? Life, I trust you. I will stop trying to make this bend to my will. I expected nothing. But in that nothing, something shifted. The phone call I had been waiting for came. The opportunity I thought was gone resurfaced, and my body, so tight with stress, began to breathe again. What I learned is this: surrender is not about results. You don't surrender in order to get what you want. You surrender because you finally see that carrying the burden alone is unsustainable. And once you let go, once you step back into the river of trust, life moves in ways you could not have designed. This is why so many traditions speak of surrender as freedom. Because freedom is not found in controlling everything. It is found in releasing the need to control. The tighter we grip, the more life resists. The more we soften, the more life responds. And here's the quiet paradox. The moment you stop fighting for outcomes, outcomes begin to align. The moment you stop chasing love, love shows up. The moment you stop trying to fix yourself, healing begins. This is not magic in the sense of tricks and illusions. It is magic in the sense of harmony, the natural alignment of your inner trust with the outer unfolding of reality. The story of surrender is not about one person. It is about all of us. At some point, life will bring each of us to a place where our strategies no longer work, where our plans fall apart, where our control dissolves. And in that place, we will be given a choice: tighten, further, or let go. If you choose to let go, if you choose surrender, you will discover what so many have discovered before you, that life was always ready to carry you, if only you would allow it. So perhaps today, you find yourself weary of holding everything together. Perhaps your mind is tired of planning. Your heart is tired of striving. Your body is tired of resisting. If that is you, consider this story not as a lesson, but as an invitation to whisper the same words I trust. Say it softly. Say it sincerely. You don't need to believe it perfectly. You only need to open the door. And once you do, watch. Watch how life responds. Watch how things begin to shift. Watch how what once felt heavy begins to flow with surprising ease. Because surrender is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of walking hand in hand with life, instead of dragging it behind you. And once you taste it, once you see how everything realigns in the current of trust, you'll know this: truth in your bones. Surrender is not loss. It is the greatest gain. 9. You and the quantum are not separate. There comes a moment in this journey when the most astonishing realization dawns, not with fireworks or grand announcements, but with a quiet, undeniable clarity. You realize that the energy you've been seeking, the intelligence you've been calling the universe, God, or the quantum field, is not a force far away, outside of you. It is not a distant power you must beg, chase, or convince. It is the very essence of who you are. For much of our lives, we are taught to see ourselves as small, separate beings in a vast and indifferent universe. We imagine the divine or the infinite as something out there, beyond reach, perhaps listening, if we are lucky, perhaps not. And in that story of separation, we live with a subtle loneliness, always trying to connect with something that feels just beyond our fingertips. But when trust deepens, a different truth reveals itself. You begin to sense, not as an idea, but as an experience, that you and the quantum are one, that the infinite energy you glimpse in synchronicities, in sudden insights, in the harmony of life. It is not other. It is the infinite within you, showing itself through your own being. I remember the first time this truth landed in me, not as a concept, but as a living reality. I was sitting quietly, breathing, not trying to meditate, not chasing enlightenment, just sitting. And in that stillness, I felt a presence within me that was vast, spacious, infinite. It was as if the boundaries of me dissolved, and yet I was more myself than ever. There was no division between the life flowing through me and the life flowing through everything else. It was all one field, and in that field, I belonged completely. This is the miracle hidden in plain sight. You are not cut off from the infinite. You are an expression of it. The quantum field is not a distant ocean you visit occasionally. It is the very water you are made of. To trust it is not to reach outside yourself. It is to allow what is already inside you to flow freely, without resistance. When you live from this awareness, everything shifts. Prayer becomes less about pleading for intervention and more about opening yourself to what already is. Manifestation becomes less about demanding outcomes and more about aligning with the frequency you already carry. Healing becomes less about fixing a broken self and more about remembering the wholeness that has always been present. It's like standing in front of a mirror. For years, you may have believed that the reflection was separate, that the image was something other. But one day, you realize it is you. The reflection is inseparable from the source. In the same way, every sign, every synchronicity, every flow of life is not something external granting you favors. It is your own infinite self reflecting back, saying, "This is who you are." And here's what makes this recognition so freeing. Once you see yourself as inseparable from the quantum, you stop chasing. You stop trying to bargain with life, trying to prove your worthiness, trying to force outcomes. Because how could you chase what you already are? How could you bargain with what is already yours? Instead, you begin to live with a quiet confidence, knowing that the intelligence of the universe is moving as you, through you, in every breath you take. Of course, the mind resists this truth. The mind is trained to think in terms of separation, me and the world, me and God, me and life. But separation is an illusion. Science itself tells us that at the smallest level, particles are not isolated. They are entangled, connected, responsive. The mystics of every tradition have said the same thing in different words. You and the infinite are not two. The role of trust, then, is simply to dissolve the illusion, to soften the walls the mind has built between me and life, to remember that what you call outside and inside are two sides of the same field. When you trust, you stop pushing against that field. You let it carry you, because you finally see it as not carrying you as something separate. It is carrying you as itself. I have often thought of it like a wave in the ocean. The wave may think of itself as separate, rising, falling, distinct, but it has never been separate from the ocean. It is the ocean, moving in a particular form. And when the wave realizes this, it stops fearing its own rise and fall. It stops fearing the unknown, because it knows that no matter what, it is the ocean, and the ocean is infinite. So it is with you. You are a unique expression. Yes, your story, your body, your experiences are yours alone. But beneath that, you are the ocean itself. You are the quantum field, taking shape as you. And when you know this, not just with your mind, but with your whole being, you no longer cling so tightly. You trust, because you finally recognize that there is nothing to be separate from. This is why the deepest teachings always point us back home, not outward. The kingdom of heaven is within you. The spark of divinity is within you. The field of quantum energy is within you. Trust does not add it to you. Trust simply clears the clouds, so you can see what has been shining all along. So, the next time you look at your life and feel disconnected, remember this: the distance is only in perception. You cannot be apart from what you are. The infinite is not waiting to meet you. It is waiting for you to remember. And when you do, life flows with a grace that feels like a miracle, but is really the most natural thing of all. Because the truth, the simplest, most profound truth, is this: you and the quantum are not separate. You never were. You never will be. 10. Personal trust as a gift to the collective. When we speak about trust, it often sounds like a private matter, something intimate, hidden in the quiet corners of our hearts. And in many ways, it is. Trust begins inside you, in those secret places no one else sees. Those moments when you whisper to yourself, I choose to let go. I choose to believe. But the truth is, trust never stays contained. It radiates, it ripples, it reaches far beyond the boundaries of your own life and touches the lives of others in ways you may never fully know. Think of a lighthouse standing on the edge of a dark shore. Its light does not speak, does not argue, does not demand. It simply shines, and in that shining, ships in the distance find direction. Travelers who might otherwise be lost see a safe path. That is what happens when you live in trust. Your life becomes a Kiat beacon. Not because you are trying to convince anyone, not because you set out to be an example, but because light cannot help but shine. I have seen this again and again. People who carry a deep trust in life seem to change the atmosphere around them. When they enter a room, the room feels different, not because they are loud, not because they have all the answers, but because their presence communicates something unspoken. It's okay. Life can be trusted, and without saying a word, they give others permission to breathe a little deeper, to soften their own fears, to imagine that perhaps things will be all right. You may not realize how powerful this is. We live in a world saturated with fear. Fear spreads quickly. It fills the news. It seeps into conversations. It weighs heavy on families and communities. But what we often forget is that peace spreads just as quickly. Calm is contagious. Trust, too, ripples outward. When you choose to trust in your own life, you are not only setting yourself free, you are sending out waves that shift the collective field we all share. Science now tells us what mystics always knew. Our hearts and minds emit fields of energy. These fields interact. They overlap. They influence one another. When you are in fear, that energy contributes to the collective field of fear. When you are in trust, you contribute something entirely different. Something healing, harmonizing, life-giving. And though you may never see the full impact, know this: every act of trust, every moment of surrender, every breath of peace you carry ripples outward into a world that desperately needs it. I once knew a woman who had endured enormous hardship. By all appearances, she had every reason to live bitter, angry, and distrustful. And yet, she carried herself with such serenity that everyone who met her felt comforted. She didn't lecture. She didn't pretend life was easy. She simply radiated a quiet confidence in the goodness of life. People were drawn to her, not to her words, but to her energy. She had become, unknowingly, a gift to her community. Her trust was not just her own. It was a medicine for those around her. And isn't that the deeper calling? Not only to find peace for ourselves, but to allow that peace to ripple outward, to live in such a way that our very presence becomes an invitation for others to remember their own capacity for trust. This is how transformation happens. Not always through great speeches or dramatic acts, but through ordinary people living from a place of alignment with the infinite. Your trust is not small. It is not insignificant. It is part of the great web of life. When you choose to trust, you tilt the balance, ever so slightly, but meaningfully, toward hope rather than despair, toward love rather than fear. You become part of a collective awakening, not by forcing it, but by embodying it. I know it can feel impossible at times. The world seems heavy, chaotic, fractured. You may think, what difference can my trust make in the midst of all this? But remember the lighthouse. A single beam of light can guide countless ships. A single candle can ignite 1,000 more without losing its flame. In the same way, your trust, even if it feels fragile, even if it feels small, has the power to awaken trust in others. This is the sacred responsibility and the sacred gift of being human. We are not isolated beings, moving alone through a meaningless void. We are connected. We are interwoven. Every choice we make, every vibration we carry, contributes to the whole, and when you choose trust, you give that gift to the collective. You remind the world that it is possible to live not just by effort, but by surrender, not just by fear, but by faith in the intelligence of life itself. So, when you feel your trust wavering, when you wonder if it matters, remember this: someone else may be watching, not watching in judgment, but in longing to know that peace is possible, longing to see that surrender is real, and your life, lived in trust, may be the proof they need. You may never know whose heart is lifted by your presence, but trust anyway, shine anyway, because the ripple is real, whether you see it or not. In the end, trust is never just about you. It is always bigger. It is always collective. It is always a gift. And the more of us who choose it, the brighter the field becomes. Together, we create not just individual lives of freedom, but a shared world of light. So let your trust be more than a personal comfort. Let it be a gift, a lighthouse for the weary, a quiet strength for the fearful, a reminder for all of us that we are not alone, and that life, even in its mystery, can be trusted. 11. Harmony with nature and the environment. There is something profoundly moving that happens when trust deepens, not just in your mind, not just in your body, but in the very way you relate to the world around you. You begin to notice that even nature itself seems to respond differently. The sky feels clearer, the water tastes sweeter, the breeze seems to carry a gentleness that speaks directly to your heart. It would be easy to dismiss these experiences as imagination, and yet, when you live with trust, you realize it is not that the world outside has suddenly changed. It is that your energy has shifted, and the world reflects that shift back to you. Life is a mirror, and the natural world is one of its most faithful reflections. I remember walking through a park one afternoon during a particularly turbulent time in my life. My mind was restless, my heart unsettled, and everything in the environment seemed to echo that turbulence. The air felt heavy, the trees looked dull, even the bird song seemed distant. A week later, I returned to the same park after a deep moment of surrender. Nothing had changed in the external world. The trees were the same, the sky the same, but my inner field had shifted, and suddenly, the whole park shimmered with life. The leaves sparkled in the sunlight. The air felt alive against my skin, and the birds' voices seemed like a choir of reassurance. The world had not changed. This is the quiet miracle of harmony with nature. When you live in trust, your energy becomes coherent, calm, and receptive. And because the field of life is interconnected, nature responds. The wind flows in rhythm with your breath. The river seems to move in step with your heartbeat. Even the smallest details, the way light filters through the branches, the way a flower turns its head, become part of an intimate dialogue between you and the world. Science has started to catch glimpses of this truth. Studies show that plants respond to human attention, that water molecules shift when exposed to intention, that environments thrive when approached with care. But long before science, indigenous cultures knew this. They spoke with rivers, listened to mountains, honored the spirits of the land. To them, harmony with nature was not a mystical practice, but a way of life. And when you trust deeply, you begin to rediscover this ancient knowing for yourself. The field of energy you carry is not isolated. It radiates outward, interacting with the living systems around you. When you live in fear, that field is jagged, chaotic, and disharmonious. Nature reflects this back to you. Storms feel harsher. The environment feels unkind. But when you live in trust, your field becomes smooth, coherent, aligned. And in that state, the natural world seems to welcome you. Animals draw near, The breeze feels like an embrace. The earth feels like a home instead of a battlefield. I've witnessed this countless times. Friends who once lived in fear spoke of feeling attacked by their surroundings. Always too cold, too hot, too harsh. But when they began to surrender, they felt nature differently. The same wind that once cut them now refreshed them. The same rain that once annoyed them now nourished them. It wasn't the weather that changed. It was their resonance with it. There is a story I love of a man who lived near the ocean. For years, he would curse the waves when storms came, shaking his fist at the sea as though it were his enemy. Later in life, after a deep spiritual awakening, he would stand on the same shore and bow to those same waves. Nothing about the ocean had changed, but he had changed. And so the ocean's voice to him changed as well. This is what harmony with nature feels like. It is not about controlling the elements. It is about aligning with them. It is about recognizing that the same intelligence that moves the tides, the same energy that sways the trees, is the energy that moves through you. You are not separate from the earth, the sky, the water. You are part of it. When you live in trust, you remember that truth, and the separation dissolves. And here is the most healing part when you resonate with nature in this way. You treat it differently. You no longer see the earth as an object to be used, but as a living partner to be honored. You slow down, you notice, you care, and in return, the environment seems to open itself to you. Gardens flourish, water feels alive, the air carries peace. You realize that nature has always been speaking, but trust is what allows you to finally hear. So if you find yourself walking outside and feeling the world against you, pause it. Ask yourself, is it the world? Or is it my inner field that is restless? And then soften, breathe, whisper trust. Watch how quickly the sky, the trees, the wind respond. Not because they have changed, but because you have returned to harmony. This harmony is not a fantasy. It is the natural state of life. When you trust, you fall back into rhythm with the song the earth has been singing all along. And in that rhythm, everything feels like home. So let the sky remind you of your vastness. Let the rivers remind you of your flow. Let the trees remind you of your rootedness. Let the wind remind you of your freedom. You are not here to conquer nature. You are here to remember you are nature. And when you live in trust, the world around you will rise to meet you in harmony, as it always longed to do. The miracle of returning to what you already are. There is a temptation to think of the strange or miraculous things you've experienced on this path as rare gifts. Moments of magic that appear only once in a while, like lightning flashing across a dark sky. But if you look closely, you'll see that they are not rare at all. They are not interruptions of life's normal flow. They are life's normal flow revealed when you finally stop resisting it. What we call miracle is simply the natural intelligence of the universe in motion, unhindered. It is the current of the river when you stop swimming against it. It is the sunlight shining when the clouds break. It is the deep exhale that comes when you stop clenching your jaw after years of holding tension. Nothing miraculous in the sense of breaking nature's laws. Only miraculous in the sense that you had forgotten how natural it could be. And so, you do not need to learn how to create reality in the way you once thought. You do not need to master techniques or force the universe into submission. Reality is not a stubborn stone you must carve. It is a living stream that responds to you the moment you allow it. The only lesson is trust. The only practice is permission. When you trust, life arranges itself with a precision and elegance that defies all your attempts at control. You find yourself in the right place at the right time, meeting the right people, hearing the right words, and you smile, not because you forced it, but because you see how beautifully it unfolds when you are no longer in the way. I think often of the countless hours I spent in my life trying to make things happen, drawing maps, crafting plans, running calculations, rehearsing conversations in my mind. And then I remember how quickly those maps unraveled, how plans collapsed, how life ignored my calculations and moved in its own direction. At the time, I thought I had failed, but now I see life was simply wiser than my plans. It was not ignoring me, it was guiding me. And when I finally stopped fighting that guidance, peace replaced exhaustion. This is the heart of it. You do not need to strain to become something more. You need only to release the illusion that you are separate from the infinite intelligence already alive within you. When you drop the constant effort to control, you return to what you have always been: limitless, connected. Oh, it is like standing in front of a mirror and suddenly realizing that the reflection has always been you. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to beg it to move. You simply recognize yourself. Trust works the same way. You are not learning to place faith in something outside yourself. You are remembering the truth of what you already are, an expression of the infinite, inseparable from the very fabric of existence. And with that recognition, the weight lifts. The world no longer feels like a battlefield to conquer, but a dance to join. You stop measuring your worth by how much you control and start savoring the grace of what unfolds. You stop clutching at life like a possession to manage and start receiving it like a gift. So, as we close this journey together, I want to leave you with a simple truth: you are not broken, and life is not against you. The very intelligence that holds galaxies in place also holds you. The same rhythm that guides the tides guides your breath. The same field that blossoms flowers in spring blossoms wisdom in you. Your task is not to learn how to summon this force, but to allow it to let go of the tight grip of fear and return, again and again, to trust. Trust in the unseen timing. Trust in the harmony that becomes visible only in hindsight. Trust in the quiet, knowing within your own chest. And if ever you doubt, if ever you feel the urge to fight and control again, pause, breathe, look at the sky. Notice how effortlessly the clouds move, how the wind shifts, how the earth turns. None of it is forced, yet all of it is precise. Your life is no different. You are part of that same flow. So let yourself soften. Let yourself surrender. Let yourself come home to the truth you already know. Deep down, the strange things you've experienced are not exceptions. They are reminders. They are the universe tapping you on the shoulder, saying, "This is who you are. This is what life feels like when you trust." And in that recognition, something quiet but powerful happens. You stop searching for miracles because you realize you have been living in one all along.